All right, folks, this is the last lesson of the unit. And again, it's almost exactly the same as what we did in lessons 2, 3, and 4. We're just adding the inequalities to them, which means we're going to graph it on a number line. So just a bunch of stuff at the top of the page is just kind of review, just so you always have it close to you. Less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than signs. I put the cute little alligator there, so you remember that it eats the bigger number. To solve inequalities, you do it the same way you do equations. You need to isolate the variable. You need to move the terms from one side to the other by applying the opposite operation. I highlighted this difference. When you're multiplying or dividing by a negative number, you have to switch the inequality. Switch, I don't know, maybe I like the word flip a little better, makes a little bit more sense to me. But it's whatever makes the most sense to you. It's only by negative numbers when you're multiplying or dividing by a negative number that you flip it. All right, so let's go ahead. We called this multi-step just because I didn't want to call it 2, 3, distribution, anything like that. So I just called it multi-step. So it includes everything we did in isolating the variables. So this is just a simple 2-step. I want to get f by itself. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So I'm going to have 7f. Ooh, not using my inequality very well there. Is less than or equal to 14. I want to get f by itself, so I'm going to divide by 7, divide by 7. Notice the 7's positive, so my inequality is going to stay the same. So f is less than or equal to 2. Okay, I'm not going to write out that sentence because I said it out loud, and as we get better at this, I'm hoping that makes more sense. So I'm going to put 2 in the middle, 3 and 4 are bigger, 1 and 0 are less. Open or close circle at 2, it's going to be closed because of the equal to sign. So obviously closed circle, nice and filled in there, nice and big. And f has to be less than, so my arrow is going to point to the less than sign. All right, hopefully that's nice and obvious for you and you can see that. So again, it's really just a review. It's building on the skills, adding one more step, but pretty easy. So this one's going to be a 3-step. I got to collect my x's on one side and my constants on the other. So I'm going to move my 8x to that side. So I'm going to subtract 8x, subtract 8x. So I'm going to have a negative 2x minus 4 is greater than a positive 10. I want to get x by itself, so I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I've got a negative 2x is greater than 14. I'm dividing by a negative 2, divide by a negative 2. So x, it's a negative, so I got to flip this. So x is less than negative 7. Oops, sorry, I just went off the page. So don't forget to flip your sign. So negative 7, numbers that are greater are negative 6 and negative 5. Less than are going to be negative 8 and negative 9. Again, I'm writing really small just so that they're right under the tick. So x is less than negative 7. So open or close circle at negative 7, it's going to be open because there's no equal sign with it. And the values are less than negative 7. So my arrow is going to point at the less than numbers. And that's it. It's really not a ton of anything new. It's just you're doing more algebra. All right, we got a few more examples to work through. And then you guys are going to be golden. All right, so this is the distribution from, I think, L3. So we're going to multiply that 3 in. We're going to leapfrog it. So negative 3 times positive 3 is going to be a negative 9x. And negative 3 times by a negative 6 is a plus 18 is greater than or equal to 27. So I'm going to minus 18 from both sides. All right, so I'm going to have 9x on, or negative 9x on this side is greater than or equal to a positive 9 on this side. Divide by negative 9, divide by negative 9. Okay, so again, dividing by a negative, that means I'm going to flip my inequality, so I'm going to change its direction. And we're going to have -1. I thought I lost, we're just going to do it on here. So -1 right here. Values greater than -1 are going to be 0 and 1. Values less than -1 are going to be -2 and -3. Open or closed circle, it's going to be closed because it has the equal to sign. And it is x is less than, so my arrow is going to point at the less than numbers. Okay? Pretty easy. Easy peasy. All right. Okay, so we're going to look at this one. Could be considered a fraction one. I don't know. There's all kinds of ways we can do it. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. I'm going to get my constant. So I'm left with a -x over 2 is greater than +5. Now, remember that your negative can go on top or bottom. I know this stresses some people out, and it always has to be the same way every time, but it really doesn't. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to multiply by a +2 because it looks like my 2 is positive. So I'm going to be left with a negative. Let's try that again. Left with a -2x over 2 is greater than 10. So that's going to leave me with a -1x is greater than 10. So I just want a positive x, so I'm going to divide by -1, divide by -1. Because I had divided by a -1, my inequality is going to flip. And so this is going to be x is less than -10. Slide that up, put it on my number line, so -10. Values greater are going to be -9 and -8. Values less are -11 and -12. Open or closed circle, it's going to be open because it doesn't have the equal to sign. And its values less. X has to be less, so arrow is going to point at the numbers that are less than -10. Going to make that arrow nice and obvious for you. And that's that. Okay, this one's like a fraction. I'm not sure you've seen this type before, which is kind of cool. Okay, so this is more like a fraction. We have a denominator of 3, so this means this whole thing up here has been divided by 3. So the opposite operation to divide by 3, so it's almost like we put brackets around this. This whole thing is divided by 3, so opposite to this is going to be multiply by 3. All right, and if we multiply this by 3, we have to multiply this by 3. So we're going to have 18 is greater than, and we're going to leapfrog this in, 3p minus 12 over 3. And if you remember back to your polynomials, this is the same thing as saying 3p divided by 3 minus 12 divided by 3. So we're going to have 18 is greater than p minus 4. And this is where that faster way of crossing things out would have worked, because you wouldn't have had to multiply it in. You could just cancel those two things out and you jump right to this line here. But if you're not comfortable with it, work it through. Or you don't even have to write this line because you know that this is going to go into here and you know it's going to go into here because we did that in our polynomials unit. So the steps in the math are still consistent. I think that's the most important thing. The steps in math don't change. We sometimes just add a few more layers to it. So I want to get p by itself, so I'm going to add 4 to both sides. Add 4 to both sides. So I have 22 is greater than p. Okay. This one is the first one we've seen with the p on this side. So I'm going to make a statement that p is less than 22. So I'm reading it, doesn't matter if it's on the right hand side. P is less than, because the pointy part's pointing at the p, 22. And it reads the same this way, 22 is bigger than p. So they mean the exact same things. But I always read from the variable over, because p is less than 22. I know where to put it on my number line. So I'm going to put 22, bigger numbers are 23 and 24, smaller numbers are 21 and 20. Is p going to have an open circle, or sorry, is 22 going to have an open or closed circle? It's going to have open, because there's no equal to sign there. and P has to be less than 22. So my arrow is going to point at the numbers that are less than 22. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the last lesson of your linear equations unit. So you have hand in 1, 2, and 3 to do. And then after you've completed those, our test date is June the 1st. So your goal is to make sure all those are handed in on the due date so you have an appropriate time to get feedback and ask any questions before the test. Let me know if you have any questions, and good luck on doing your hand-in assignment.